Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Daniela Rain Tamayo, together with Jeremy Camasis and Jasmine Escoriaga, that will discuss about the policies on agrarian reform. So first, let's talk about the agrarian reform. So what is agrarian reform? Agrarian reform is essentially the rectification of the whole system of agriculture. When we say rectification, it is the act of correcting something or something right, or making something right. Also, agrarian reform is an important aspect of the Philippine economy because nearly half of the population is employed in the agriculture sector and most citizens live in rural areas. The agriculture sector is engaged with growing crops such as vegetables and fruits, raising animals like cows, carabaos, harvesting fish, and many more. Next, agrarian reform is centered on the relationship between production and distribution of land among farmers. It is also focused on the political and economic class character of the relations in production and distribution in farming and related enterprises and how these connect to wider class structure. So, ang mga farmers gusto nilang ipanukala ang agrarian reform upang ma-provide ng mga landowners ang equality in terms of income and opportunities. Empower the landowner beneficiaries to have the equitable land ownership and enhance the agricultural production and also productivity to provide the employment to more agricultural workers and to put an end to conflict regarding land ownership. Through genuine and comprehensive agrarian reform, the Philippines would be able to gain more from its agricultural potential and uplift the Filipinos in the agricultural sector who have been for the longest time mired in poverty and discontent. This agrarian reform occurred in Republic Act number 6657 or Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law that was declared by our former President Corazon Aquino on 1988. Sa act na ito ay nakalagay na agrarian reform means the distribution of land regardless of crops of fruits produced to farmers and regular farm workers who are landless, irrespective of the new real arrangement, to include the totality of factors and support services designed to lift the economic status of the beneficiaries and all other arrangements alternative to the physical redistribution of land such as production or profit sharing, labor administration, and the distribution of shares of stock, which allow beneficiaries to receive a just share of fruits of the lands they work. So for us to understand the development of the agrarian reform in the Philippines, we turn our attention to our country's history, especially our colonial past, where we could find where the agrarian reform started, whose the country experiences until to this very day. Those colonial past were the land ownership in the Philippines under the Spain and American. So, but before we proceed to land ownership in the Philippines under Spain, I want to inform you all that before the Spain colonialized our country, the Philippines is already known as a civilized country since they have their own economy, politics, traditions, and beliefs. So noon, ang mga tao sa Pilipinas ay nakatira sa mga towns o tinatawag na barangay. Sa barangay na ito, namumuno ang tinatawag na chiefs or datos. The datos comprise as the nobility or the maharlikas then came to the timawa or also called freeman, followed by the aliping mamahay or serfs and aliping sagigilid or slaves. Despite of the existence of the different classes in the social structure, practically everyone has access to the fruits of the soil. Then money was unknown and the rice served as the medium of the exchange. Ang mga pangunahing kinabubuhay din noon ay ang pangangaso, pangingisda, pagtatanim, at pakikipaglaban, pakikipagkalakalan. So when the Spaniards colonized the country, they brought them a system of pueblo agriculture were organized into a pueblo and given land to cultivate. First, what is pueblo agriculture? Agriculture is the system wherein native rural communities were organized into pueblo and each Christianized native family is given a 4 to 5 hectares of land to cultivate. It is a practice no sharecropper class or landless class, and native families were merely holders and not landowners. In other words, families were not allowed to own their land. The King of Spain, which is King Philip II, owned the, owned the land. Then the Filipinos were assigned to these lands to cultivate them and pay their colonial tributes to the Spanish authorities in the form of agricultural products they produced. So ang tributes ay tinatawag natin ngayon na tax o tax payment. Then later on, through the law of Indies, or also called Leyes de las Indias. So what is the law of Indies? It is an entire body of laws issued by the Spanish crown of the American and the Asian possessions of its empire. They regulated social, political, religious, and economic life in these areas. The Spanish crown awarded tracts of the land to first religious orders. Ito yung mga Catholic wherein they receive a land for them to build churches. Then Spanish military as a repartimientos or rewarded for their service. So the repartimiento systems by which the crown allowed to certain colonies or the Spanish military to recruit the indigenous people for forced labor. And lastly, the Spanish encomenderos, those mandated to manage the encomienda or the land given to them where Filipinos worked and paid their tributes to the encomendero. This is also known as the Spanish colonizer. So the encomienderos were those who were under the encomienda system. They were granted the right to compel indigenous people to work their land and to pay tributes. Sila yung mga naka-assign para magkolekta ng mga tribute or ng mga tax ng mga native Filipino noon. Also, encomienderos are mandated through these grants to convert natives to Christianity and endorse Spanish as their primary language. In the past, native Filipinos have uncleared religions. Other religions present include the animism, or it is the belief that objects, places, and creatures all possesses a distinct spiritual essence. Indigenous beliefs and mythology such as the Anito and influences from the Hinduism and Buddhism. Noon, ang mga lengguwahe ng mga Pilipino ay Tagalog that has a conventional writing system known as baybayin. Ang baybayin ay ginagamit ng mga etnikong grupo sa Pilipinas noon. So, the next is the encomienda system was an unfair and abusive system. The encomienda system was established by the Spanish crown in the 1500s. It was a formal system of forced labor in Spanish colonies in the Philippines intended to encourage conquest and colonization. Under this system, leaders of the indigenous community paid tribute to colonists. So, ito yung mga datos or mga chiefs na kung saan nagbibigay sila ng mga pagkain, damit, mga meals o mga manggagawa. This system was fundamental to the economics of early Spanish colonialism. So, bakit nga nasabi na ang system na ito ay unfair and abusive? It is because the system must practice wherein the dealers were made to compulsory sell their products at a low price or surrender their agricultural harvest to the Spanish authorities where the encomienderos can sell it for a profit. Filipinos during the system were also required to render the services to their encomienderos that were unrelated to farming. Sa, sa sistema rin nilang ito ay meron silang vision which is the Spanish Crown and vision that the encomienda system have a mutual obligation between indigenous people and colonists. Indigenous people would provide limited tribute and labor, and colonists, on the other hand, would provide religious and cultural instructions. So from the encomienda system, hacienda system developed in the beginning of the 19th century as the Spanish government implemented policies that would fast-track the entry of the colony in the capitalist world. So this system was designed to keep people that were in debt working on a piece of land. People working on haciendas were made to stay there as long as possible using various means. This owner of these haciendas were called haciendados and they were able to make things huge amounts of money by exploiting these workers. The economy was tied to the world market as the Philippines became as exporter of raw materials and importer of goods. Agricultural exports were demanded and the hacienda system was developed as a new form of ownership. Next, in the 1860s, Spain enacted a law according landholders to register their land holdings and only those who knew benefited from this. So the ancestral lands were claimed and registered in other people's names such as the Spanish officials or the local chieftains. As a result, many peasant families who were assigned to the land in the earlier days of colonization were driven out or forced to come under the power of these people who claimed their rights to the land because they held a title. Filipinos fought the Philippine Revolution in a confluence of motivations, but the greatest desire for freedom would be the necessity of owning a land. So as the Filipinos were abused and expoliated and deprived for their rights, the revolution of the peasant and the farmers happened in 1896 and articulated their aspiration for agrarian reform and for a just society. Women also voted for a freedom and played an important role in the planning and implementing the activities of the revolutionary movement. Upon the end of Philippine the revolutionary government will declare all large landed estates, especially the friar lands, confiscated and become government property. However, the First Philippine Republic was short-lived as the entrance of the Americans will signal as a new era of colonialism and imperialism in the Philippines. So, land ownership in the Philippines under the Americans. The Americans were aware that the main cause of social unrest in the Philippines is landless and they attempted to put an end to the deplorable conditions of the tenant farmers as passing several land policies to increase the small landholders and distribute ownership to the bigger number of Filipino tenants and farmers. So during the time where American were already known So during the American were already know that the reason of social unrest ay isa sa mga pinakamamabigat na problema ng Pilipinas ay ang kawalan ng lupa o teritoryo. Kaya naman ay sinubukan ng mga Amerikano na pigilan at resolbahan ang isyung ito para sa mga magsasaka. Ang ginawa ng mga Amerikano ay nagpasa sila ng ilang mga patakaran o land policies to increase the small landholders and to distribute ownership to the bigger number of Filipino tenants and farmers. So the first is the Philippine Bill of 1902 provided regulations on the disposal of republic lands. So ito yung una nilang pinasang policy. So to this bill, a private individual may own 16 hectares of land while the corporate landholders may have 1,024 hectares. Also, Americans were also given rights to own agricultural land in the country. Then, so the Philippine Commission also enacted Act number 496 or the Land Registration Act, which introduced the torrent system to address the absence of earlier records of issued land titles and conduct accurate land survey. So, after nila mapasa yung Philippine Bill of 1902, nasunod naman ang the Land Registration Act na nag-introduce ng torrent system. If you are wondering if what is torrent system, it is a land registration. It is one that will inspect or maintain a register of holdings which serves as an conclusive evidence of title of the person who recorded on the register as the proprietors and of all other interests. The main pur- the main purpose of it is to provide certainty of title to land. So once your name is registered on the Torrens title register, you will become the owner of the property to the exclusion of all others, including the government. In 1903, the Homestead Program was introduced, allowing a tenant to enter into an agricultural business by acquiring a farm of at least 16 hectares. Homestead program it was intended to stimulate economic development through increased agricultural output from previous unoccupied lands and also to relieve agrarian problems in densely settled parts of the country. However, this program was limited to areas in northern Luzon and Mindanao, where colonial penetration has been difficult to Americans, a problem that they inherited from the Spaniards. So in other words, it is only introduced in some part of Mindanao and northern Luzon where there were available public alienable or transfer and disposable lands. These lands refers to those lands of the public domain which have been subject of the present present system of classification and declared as not needed for forest, purposes or national parks or available for disposition. Sabi rin dito, even though that American passed several land policies during the American period, the ownership did not improve but worsened. Why? Because there was no limit to the size of land holdings people could possess and the accessibility possession was limited to those who can afford to buy, register, and even acquire fixed property titles. Not all prior lands acquired by the Americans were given to landless peasants, peasants farmers, and also some land were sold and leased to American and Filipino business interests. Next, this early land reform program was also implemented without mechanisms. Land reform program is the redistribution of land ownership rights in recent decades. The concept has been broadened in recognition of the strategic role of land and agriculture in development. But since it was implemented without support mechanisms, if a landless peasant farmer received a land, he only received it and nothing more. So what do we mean by support mechanisms? It is a method of providing support, assistance to entrepreneurial activity from the foundations, nonprofit organizations, governmental department, and many more. So many were forced to return to tenancy and wealthy people, hacienderos, purchased or forcibly took over lands from farmers who cannot afford to pay their debts. So dahil sa pangyayaring ito, maraming nangungupang magsasaka ng lupain ang humantong sa malawakang pag-aasa. So the system introduced by American enabled more lands to be placed under tenancy and led to widespread peasants uprisings such as colorums and sakdal uprising in Luzon. So peasants and workers found a refuge from millenarian movements that gave them hope that change could still happen through militancy. So the Colorum is a rebel organization characterized by religious fanaticism or a member thereof. On the other hand, the Sakdal or Sakdalista uprising was a peasant rebellion in central Luzon that lasted for two days, May 2 to 3 in 1935. It was easily crushed by the government forces then, but these historical events tells of the social inequality brought about by issues in land ownership and tenancy in the country. Also, the Filipino word sakdal means to accuse, which is the title of newspaper helmed by Benigno Ramos. He rallied support from Manila and nearby provinces through the publication, which led to the establishment of the Partido Sakdalista in 1933. They also demanded reforms from the government such as abolition of taxes and equal or common owner of lands, among other. They opposed the dominant Nationalista Party's acceptance of gradual independence from the United States and instead demanded immediate severance of ties with America. So during the years of Commonwealth government, the situation further worsened as peasant uprisings increased and landlord-tenant relationship become more and more disparate. President Quezon laid down social justice program focused on the purchased haciendas which were to divided and sold to tenants. The social justice promotes to the fairness and equity across many aspects of society. It helps with the issues such as voting rights, refuge crisis, workers' rights, economic justice, and many more. And so to arrest the increasing social unrest in Central Luzon. So sa time na to, mas lumala ang situation dahil sa pagdami ng mga magsasakang nag-aalsa at ang discrimination between the landlord and tenant. At dahil nga dito, gumawa ng social justice programs si dating Pangulong Quezon na nakapokus sa pagbili ng mga lupa na hahatiin at ipagbibili sa mga tenants o mga nangungupahan upang masolusyonan ang issues sa pagitan ng landlord at tenants at para na rin mabawasan ang mga magsasakang nag-aaklas. So his administration also created the National Rice and Corn Corporation or NARIC. It is to assign public defenders to assist peasants in court battles for their rights to the land and the Court of Industrial Relations to exercise jurisdiction over disagreements arising from landowner and tenant relationship. In addition, NARIC is under provisions of Act Number 4198, Proclamation Number 58 in 1936, designating the National Rice and Corn Corporation as a relief organization for the purpose of importing rice, free of duty in such quantities as may be necessary to relieve situation in accordance with Proclamation Number 11 in November 30, 1935. Then, the Homestead Program also continued through the National Settlement Administration or NLSA. So, ang provision ding ito ay tinatag ni dating Pangulong Quezon noong November 1, 1945. Layunin nito na bigyan ng maayos na tirahan ang mga mamamayan, magkaroon ng sapat na pondo para dito at mapaunlad ang kabuhayan ng mga mamamayang Pilipino. So, ng mga programang ito ang pagbibigay ng pagkakataon na magkaroon ng sakahan ang mga non-farmers and small farmers from congested areas at upang mapadali ang pagsama-sama ng mga tao in different sections sa Pilipinas. So, ang congested area refers to an area where extremely crowded and blocked with traffic or people. So, moreover, efforts towards agrarian reform by the Commonwealth failed because of many problems such as budget allocation for the settlement program and widespread peasant uprisings. Then lastly, the World War II put a halt or stop to all interventions to solve these problems as the Japanese occupied the country. So noong panahon ng pananakop ng mga Hapon ay kontrolado ng mga hukbalahak ang buong lugar ng Central Luzon. Landlords who supported the Japanese lost their land to peasants, while those who supported the hukbalahak earned fixed rentals in favors of the tenants. Sa kasamaang palad, ang pagtatapos ng digmaan ay hudyat din ng pagtatapos ng mga naipon ng mga magsasaka sa pagdating ng mga Hapon sa Pilipinas noong 1942. Lumakas ang organisasyong magsasaka at manggagawa. Maraming magsasaka ang humawak ng armas at pakilala sa grupong anti-Japanese na tinatawag nating hukbalahak o hukbo ng bayan laban sa Hapon. So now let's proceed to the post-war interventions toward agrarian reform that will be discussed by Kamasis.
So, ayan, post-war intervention towards the agrarian reform. So, pagkatapos po ng digmaan ay step by step pa lamang ang progress ng ating bansa sa kadahilan ng maraming nasira at naapektuhan at isa na dito ang ating agrikultura. So, yung agrikultura po natin ay una nilang pinansin dahil ito po ay ang pangunahing source ng pangkabuhayan at pagkain. Agrarian reform under Manuel Rojas. So, rehabilitation and rebuilding after the war were focused on providing solution to the problem of the past. The administration of President Rojas passed Republic Act Number 34 and approved on September 20, 1946, fixing the definite percentage rates for the share of the tenants and the landowners in the rice product. So, sa panahon po ng administrasyon ni Manuel Rojas ay ipinasa niya po ang Republic Act Number 34. So, ano nga ba ito? Ang Republic Act Number 34 ay ang 70-30 sharing arrangement sa pagitan ng tenant at landlord. Ngunit hindi lamang po ang 70-30 arrangement ang nabuo dito. Nakadepende kasi ito sa kung ano ang napag-usapan ng tenant at landlord at ito po ay tinatawag na freedom to contract. So nakasaad po sa freedom to contract na ang landlord at ang tenant ay may malayang makapamili ng paraan kung paano nila gagawin ang paghahati or sharing ng kanilang parte sa lupang sakahan na walang tinatatapakang batas. So, yung Republic Act Number 34 naman ay meron tayong tatlong paraan ng paghahati ng parte sa lupang sakahan. So, meron po tayong 70-30 sharing arrangement, 50-50 arrangement, at ang panghuli ay ang 30-70 arrangement. So, sa 70-30 arrangement ay pinag-uusapan dito na ang 70% ng lupang sakahan ay mapupunta ang kita sa landlord dahil siya ang nagpasa ng gastos dito, samantalang ang tenant naman o umuupa at nangangalaga ng lupang sakahan naman ay 30% ang mapupunta sa kanya. Sa 50-50 sharing arrangement naman ay equal po ang kita ng landlord at ang tenant, pati na rin po sa magiging gastos ng lupang sakahan. Depende na lang po kung paano nila hahatiin ang gastos doon na kakailanganin nila. So, sa 30-70 naman po ay kabaliktaran ng 70-30 sharing arrangement. So, usually po, dito ang 70% ay mapupunta sa tenant at dahil siya po ang gumastos at 30% naman po ang mapupunta sa landlord. So, agrarian reform under Elpidio Quirino. So, under naman po sa termino ni President Elpidio Quirino ay na-establish ang Land Settlement Development Corporation or LASIDECO. So, ano po ba ang naging parte ng LASIDECO sa agrarian reform? So yung Land Settlement Development Corporation or LASDECO ay created by Executive Order number 355 series of 1950. So ano pong meron dito? Ang LASDECO ay nagbigay ng opportunity na magkaroon ng lupa yung mga landless. So hindi lamang yung mga magsasaka or tenants, kasama rin po ang mga nakagraduate ng under ng agrikultura or veterano ng giyera, pati na rin po ang guerrilla organization. So, ang ginawa po ng LASIDECO ay sila ang yung nag-facilitate ng pagbibigay ng settlement, cultivation, farmland, as well as nag-provide ng irrigation system. So, pinaka-importante po at nakatulong yung irrigation system sa mga magsasaka dahil ito po yung nag-supply ng tubig sa mga tanim ng mga magsasaka. So, yung LASIDECO din po ang nag-encourage sa mga farmers na gumamit ng makinarya para mas mapadali ang kanilang pagsasaka. Nag-provide din ang LASIDECO ng farming tools. So, Agrarian Reform under Ramon Magsaysay. So, under naman po ng administrasyon ni President Ramon Magsaysay ay na-abolish po yung sinasabi nating LASIDECO. So, napalitan po ito ng National Resettlement and Rehabilitation Administration or NARA. So, Magsaysay saw the importance of pursuing a genuine land reform program and so he convinced the Congress para maipasa ang legislation at ma-improve nito ang land reform situation. So, naipasa po ang Republic Act number 1199 or yung Agricultural Tenancy Act to govern the relationship between tenant farmers and landholders, protecting the tenurial rights of tenants and enforcement tenancy practices. So, through the Republic Act number 1199 or the Agricultural Tenancy Act, the following were created and established. So, number 1 is the Court of Agriculture Relation was created in 1955. So, ito po ay para ma-improve ang tenancy security at marisolba ang land dispute filed by the landowner and peasant organization. So, number 2 is nag-establish ng Agricultural Tenancy Commission to administer problem created by tenancy. So, number 3 is the creation of Agriculture Credit and Cooperative Financing Administration o yung tinatawag natin na ACCFA. Ginawa po ito para mag-provide ng warehouse facilities and ma-assist ang mga farmers in marketing their products. So, number 4, the administration did establishment of agricultural banks. Ito naman po ay nag-provide easier terms in applying for a lot in other farms land. So, Republic Act number 3844 or yung Agricultural Land Reform Code, yung primary sources namin ay Declaration of Policy under RA number 3844 or Agricultural Land Reform Code. Yung source po ay Section 2 RA 3844. So, ang Republic Act number 3844 was a advancement of land reform in the Philippines na ipinagtibay noong 1963 under President Diosdado Macapagal. So, number 1 po dyan is to establish owner cultivatorship and the economic family-sized farm as the basis of Philippine agriculture. As a consequence, divert landlord capital in agriculture to industrial development. Number 2, to achieve a dignified existence for the small farmers, free from pernicious institutional restraint and practices. Number 3 is to create a truly viable social and structure in agriculture conducive to greater productivity and higher farm incomes. Number 4 is to apply all labor laws equally and without discrimination in both industrial and agricultural wage earners. So, number 5 is to provide a more vigorous and systematic land resettlement program and public land distributor. So, number 6 is to make the small farmers more independent, self-reliant, and responsible citizen and source of genuine strength in our democratic society. So, ang pinaka-purpose po ng RA number 3844 ay to make the small farmers more independent, self-reliant, and responsible citizens, and a source of genuine strength in our democratic society. So, why was number 3844 considered the most comprehensive piece of legislation ever enacted in the Philippines? So, it emphasized the owner cultivatorship and farmer independence, equity, productivity improvement, and the public distribution of land.
So, agrarian reform efforts under Marcos. President Marcos declared martial law in 1972, enabling him to essentially wipe out the landlord-dominated Congress. Through his technocrats, the person who is able to expand executive power to start a fundamental restructuring of government, and he also solved the deep structural problem of the countryside. 5 days after the proclamation of martial law, President Marcos issued Presidential Decree Number 27, or the Code of Agrarian Reform of the Philippines, emancipating the tenant farmers from the bondage of the soil. In one stroke, tenant farmers in all private agricultural lands primarily devoted to rice and corn were deemed owners of the lands they were tilling. Primary sources: Presidential Decree Number 27, 21 October 1972. This shall apply to tenant farmers of private agricultural lands primarily under a system of sharecrop or lease tenancy, whether classified as landed estate or not. Dito, binigyan ni President Marcos ng karapatan na mabigyan ng lupa ang mga farmers. 5 hectares if not irrigated and 3 hectares if irrigated. Dito sa mga lupang ibibigay sa kanila, pwede silang magtanim o magtayo ng kanilang sariling bahay. In all cases, the landowner may retain an area of not more than 7 hectares. If the such landowner is cultivating an area or no will cultivate in it. Determining the cost of the land to be transferred to tenant farmers will be equivalent to 2 1/2 times the average harvest of 3 normal crop years immediately preceding with the promulgation of this decree. The total cost of the land including the interest at the rate of 6% per annum shall be paid by the tenant in 15 years of 15 equal annual amortization. In case of default, the amortization due shall be paid by the farmers' cooperative in which the defaulting tenant farmers is a member with the cooperative having a right of recourse against him. No title to the land owned by the tenant farmers will be issued to tenant farmers unless and until the tenant farmers have become full-fledged members of a duly recognized farmers' cooperative. Title to the land acquired pursuant to this decree shall not be transferable except by hereditary succession or the government in accordance with the provision of this decree and other existing. The Department of Agrarian Reform, through its Secretary, is hereby empowered to promulgate rules and regulation for the implementation of this decree. Rules and Regulation. Operational Land Transfer. Tenants of more than 7 hectares of rice and corn lands commence and through legal compulsion and improved delivery of support services to the small farmers, agrarian reform seemed to be finally achievable. Next, under the Rice Self-Sufficiency Program, Masagana 99, land work by wage labor was also exempt from the program, so the landed elite only had to evict their tenants and hired workers instead. Ang mga farmers ay pwedeng humiram sa bangko ng 3 hektarya na lupa at mga agricultural inputs. However, the landlord can still find ways to circumvent the law. Because only rice and corn were the focus of agrarian reform, some landlords only needed to change crops to be exempt from the program, such as coconut and sugar lands. Landlessness increased, which made it all the more difficult for the program to succeed because landless peasants were excluded from the program. Lands worked by wage labor were also exempt from the program, so the landed elite only had to evict their tenants and hard workers instead. Eventually, the rise of the Agrarian Reform movement significantly contributed to the government's Agrarian Reform program, partial success. However, the government has not been able to fully harness the power of this movement to push for more rapid and more meaningful agrarian reform because of the CARP's inherent loopholes in the law. Strong landowner resistance and the New People Army's constant advocacy of its own agrarian revolution, it was only partially successful in breaking up monopolies despite knowing the evolution of how agrarian reform has contributed to the improvement of the socio-economic conditions of landless farmers and political development of the Philippines in terms of involving the landless in policy making and the distribution of large private land holdings. It appears that poverty and inequality are still prevalent in much rural-urban reform is the government's response to resolve land-related conflicts in the Philippines that have been ongoing for centuries. This conflict stems from the landlessness of the farmers and the abusive landowners where the tenants are constantly extorted as well as the lack of support and action from the government. In short, maraming iba't ibang paraan na ginamit ng mga tao upang mapanatili ang kanilang kapangyarihan at mangibabaw. Next is post-1986 Agrarian Reform. The overthrow of Marcos and the 1987 Constitution resulted in a renewed interest and attention to agrarian reform as President Corazon Aquino envisioned agrarian reform to be the centerpiece of her administration's social legislation, which proved difficult because her past background betrayed her. She came from a family of a wealthy and landed clan that owned Hacienda Luisita. On July 22, 1987, Aquino issued Presidential Proclamation 131 and Executive Order 229, which outlined her land reform program. In 1988, Congress passed Republic Act number 6657 or the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law or CARL, which introduced the program with the same name, Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program or CARP. It enabled the redistribution of agricultural lands and to tenants farmer from landowners who were paid in exchange by the government through just compensation and allowed them to retain not more than 5 hectares corporate landowners were, however, allowed under law to voluntarily divest a proportion of their capital stock, equity, or participation in favor of their workers or other qualified beneficiaries instead of turning over their land to the government. So, noong July 22, 1987 daw, naglabas si Corazon Aquino ng Presidential Proclamation 131 at Executive Order 229 at marami pang inilabas at binago si Corazon Aquino noong siya ay Pangulo pa at ang iba ay naaprubahan pa ng Kongreso tulad ng programa sa lupa at ang pagbabago ng Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law o CARL na pinalitan ng Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program o CARP. Ito ay pamahagi ng lupa, pangkultura, ganun pa man ang mga corporate na may-ari ng lupa ay pinahintulutan sila sa ilalim ng batas na kusang loob na magdebase ng isang proportion ng kanilang capital stock dahil ito ay kailangan ng mga manggagawa o iba pang mga kwalipikadong benepisyo sa halip na ibigay ang lupa sa gobyerno. Timeline: Executive Order Number 228, July 16, 1987, declared full ownership to qualified farmer beneficiaries covered by PD 27. It also determines the value of remaining unvalued rice and corn land subject to PD 27 and provided for the manner of payment by the FBs and the mode of compensation to landowners. Executive Order Number 229, July 22, 1987, provided a mechanism for the implementation of the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program. Proclamation Number 131, July 22, 1987, instituted the CARP as a major program of the government. It provided for a special fund known as the Agrarian Reform Fund with an initial amount of 50 billion pesos to cover the estimated cost of the program from 1987 to 1992. Executive Order Number 129A, July 26, 1987, streamlined and expanded the power and operations of the DAR. Republic Act Number 6657, June 10, 1988, Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law, an act that became effective on June 15, 1988 and instituted a comprehensive agrarian reform program to promote social justice and industrialization of providing the mechanism for its implementation and for other purposes. This law is still the one being implemented at present. Executive Order Number 405, June 14, 1990, vested in the Land Bank of the Philippines the responsibility to determine land valuation and compensation for all lands covered by CARP. Executive Order Number 407, June 14, 1990, accelerated the acquisition and distribution of agricultural lands, pasture lands, fish ponds, agroforestry lands, and other lands of the public domain suitable for agriculture. CARP was limited because it accomplished very little during the administration of Aquino. It only accomplished 22.5% of land distribution in 6 years, owing to the fact that Congress, dominated by the landed elite, was unwilling to fund the high compensation cost of the program. It was also mired in controversy since Aquino seemingly bowed down to the pressure of her relatives by allowing the stock redistribution option. Hacienda Luisita recognized itself as a corporation and distributed stock to farmers. Ibig sabihin daw ay limitado ang CARP dahil kakaunti lang nagawa nito noong administrasyong Aquino. Nakamit lamang nito ang 22.5% na pamamahagi ng lupa sa 6 na taon. Dahil sa katotohanan na ang Kongreso na pinangungunahan ng mga piling tao ay hindi gustong pondohan ng matataas na halaga ang mga kompensasyon ng programa. Nalugmok din ito sa kontrobersya dahil tila yumuko raw si Aquino sa panggigipit ng kanyang mga kamag-anak sa pamamagitan ng pagpapahayag na stock redistribution option. Ang Hacienda Luisita ay muling inayos ang sarili sa isang korporasyon at namamahagi ng mga stock sa mga magsasaka. Last is, under the term of President Ramos, CARP implementation was speeded in order to meet the 10-year time frame despite limitation and constraints in funding, logistic, and participation of involved sectors. By 1996, the Department of Agrarian Reform, or DAR, distributed only 58.25% of the total area target to be covered by the program. To address the lacking funding and the dwindling time for the implementation of CARP, Ramos signed Republic Act Number 8532 in 1998 to amend CARP and extend the program to another 10 years. Ang ibig sabihin nito ay sa ilalim ng termino ng Pangulong Ramos, pinabilis ang pagpapatupad ng CARP upang matugunan ang 10 taong takdang panahon sa kabila ng mga limitasyon at hadlang sa pagpopondong, logistik at partisipasyon ng mga sangkot na sektor. Pagsapit ng 1996, ang Department of Agrarian Reform o DAR ay namahagi lamang ng 58.25%. Nakabuo ang target ng lugar na sasakupin ng programa upang matugunan ang kakulangan ng pondo at ang lumiliit na oras para sa pagpapatupad ng CARP. Nilagdaan ni Ramos ang Republic Act Number 8532 noong 1998 upang amendahan ang CARP at paluwigin ng isa pang 10 taon. So next is
CARPER and the future of the agrarian reform in the Philippines. So what is Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law or CARP? Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law or of 1988, Republic Act number 6652 is a 20-year-old program of the government from 1998 to 2008. An act instituting a comprehensive agrarian reform program to promote social justice and industrialization, providing the mechanism for its implementation and for other purposes. So in December 2008, the CARP expired, leaving the 1.2 million farmer beneficiaries and 1.6 million hectares of agricultural land to be distributed to farmers. So dahil nga sa meron pa ring natitira na lupa at meron pa ring hindi na bibigyan na farmer ay ipinasa ni President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo ang Republic Act 9700. So, ito po yung Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program Extension with Reform. So, ito po yung CARPER. So, CARPER is a law with an intention to extend the another law which is the CARP. So, in-extend po ng CARP ng 5 years ang deadline ng distribution ng agricultural land sa mga farmers noong 2009 to 2014. So, ang CARPER po ay naka-distribute na 1 million hectares na lupa sa 900,000 farmers beneficiary. Dahil po sa merong duration, ang CARPER ay hindi pa rin po na-distribute lahat ng lupang sakahan sa mga natitirang magsasaka. Ang mga agency po na humawak dito ay ang Department of Environment and Natural Resources or DENR and the Department of Agrarian Reform or DAR. But kahit po i-combine yung effort and resources ng dalawang agency ay hindi pa rin po nila na-achieve fully yung goal ng agrarian reform ng Pilipinas. So, agrarian reform under President Benigno Aquino 3. Next slide please. So, sa administrasyon naman po ni President Benigno Aquino III ay nangako po siyang during his 2012 State of the Nation Address na tatapusin niya ang goal ng Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program o yung CARP na before daw po matapos ng kanyang termino. So, the younger Aquino distributed their family-owned Hacienda Luisita Interlac. So, bukod pa doon ay ipinangako niya na madidistribute po lahat ng privately owned lands of productive agricultural estates sa bansa, lalo na po yung mga nakalusot sa coverage of the program. So, agrarian reform under President Rodrigo Roa Duterte, so 2016 to the present. So, under his leadership, the President wants to pursue a aggressive land reform program that would help alleviate the life of poor Filipino farmers by prioritizing the provision of support services alongside land distribution. The President directed the DAR to launch the second phase of agrarian reform, where the landless farmers would be awarded with undistributed lands under the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program. So, according to the provision of Section 30 CARPER law, any case or proceeding involving the implementation of the provision of CARP as amended, which may remain pending on June 30, 2014, shall be allowed to proceed so its finality and be executed even beyond such date. So it means na kahit na matapos na ang 5-year extension ay pwede pa rin ipagpatuloy ang CARPER. Duterte governance has taken in action to all unfulfilled responsibilities of the past administration that led to backlogs. So yun lang. Thank you for listening.